Okay, here they are, everybody.
Hello, Kara and Gail from New Jersey. How are you two?
Cold, very cold.
Much colder there than here.
Probably.
Yeah, much colder, much colder. It's about, let's see, it's about 17 degrees right now, I think.
No, thanks. No, we can't complain about weather at all. Before we delve into, Shanley Hotel and Imaginary Friends, tell us a little bit about yourselves. You both are paranormal investigators as well as authors and kind of beyond. So give us a little elevator speech about who you are and what you do.
So I'm Gail. I'm from Joplin, Missouri. It's a town about 50,000 people. The Missouri Ozarks are steeped in paranormal activity and legend and lore, and that's how I came by my love of all things paranormal. And yes, we do paranormal investigations here. We do lectures, and we just finished our second book, which is set to be hopefully, it'll be out. Well, our first book will be out probably at the end of this month, and our second one is to be announced.
Congratulations. Wow.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
And Kara, where are you from originally, and how did you get involved in the paranormal?
I am New Jersey, born, raised, bred, everything. I'm from here. I didn't stray far. And I got into the paranormal because I was raised in a stereotypical Italian household that had a lot of Italian folklore meshed into our daily lives. And that pushed me into studying my culture more and studying more primitive religions, and then going into the paranormal. It was just a very easy transgression. And then as I grew with that, I started becoming a paranormal investigator, started collecting objects with attachment in it, and now I actually work with people and religious organizations for people who believe that they are being oppressed or they have in need of an exorcism.
Oh, wow.
Notice the two crosses.
That is really interesting stuff. There's like hours of stuff to talk about that, but that's not our topic, so we'll have
to do it again.
That is so interesting. But I would like to ask about the book. You sort of mentioned that we just published a book. Can you just tell us, either one of you, tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure, you could. Okay, so our first book is it's called Out of the Darkness into the Light, and that is a compilation of not all of, but most of the locations that we've been to, and their stories, and some of the haunted objects and their stories. But more than just their stories, it's the life lessons we learned by being involved in the field. Yeah. What we took away from it, because when you're dealing with objects, haunted objects, and you're dealing with locations, you experience a lot of emotions, and you experience the emotions of others, and you're watching other people have the same experiences that you are, and you learn so much about yourself, and you learn so much about other people, past and present, and we decided we wanted to put it down on paper. And the second book,
I love that, these places, you meet so many different types of people. The experience can change you. You see things that you don't see when you're sitting at home watching Netflix. There's
100%. Well, I guess it depends on what you're watching on Netflix, but yeah.
That's a valid point.
I guess so.
And hello, Sally. Thanks for jumping on. And hey, Jen, good to see you again as well. Thank you all for watching. Remember, if you have questions for our guests tonight, make sure you throw those into the chat.
I know you love the history part, and then you love how the paranormal ties in, and then you love how that impacted people, how all that impacted their lives, how it impacts you. So the way they're describing their book is very much akin to what you do, what you love.
Absolutely. I think that's why we connected so well when we talked about the Shanley Hotel. Gail and Kara were both like a wealth of information of the history of this place. And then you investigated it numerous times, if I remember.
Yeah.
So they have like this personal relationship with this hotel that has this deep history, which is perfect for our conversation.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So how does Imaginary Friends work into all of this?
I think it was just brought up as we were chatting, and Imaginary Friends came in, and I was like, oh, I would love to talk to you guys more about what Imaginary Friends are.
And throughout these conversations we've been having over the last year in this venue, that's come up a good number of times.
Absolutely, it does. It does. And did you have an imaginary friend when you were a kid?
No. I was thinking about that. Like, I do not remember having an imaginary friend. I remember having a Pooh Bear, Winnie the Pooh Bear, that I was inseparable from.
Yeah.
But No, did you?
I don't think I did, but I know a lot of people who have. And I'm curious for you two, did either of you have an imaginary friend when you were a child?
I had an imaginary friend. I did not. I had an imaginary friend when I was little, and I actually I used to sit by the closet and play with the imaginary friend, and I remember it to this day. The doll that I used to play with was maybe maybe that was one of the ones we had throughout. I used to still have the doll up in the attic that I used to play with the with my imaginary friend Marion. That was the name of my imaginary friend, Marion. Go figure. Mary, just Marion. I don't know. Like, I don't know, Gilligan's Island, maybe? I don't know. Yes, I never told her that. I'm just letting this up. I know. Old Marion. Old Marion. Old Marion, the imaginary friend.
So let me ask you this.
I'm loving this interaction. That is so interesting.
So I'm curious, Kara, as this imaginary friend, would you be able to recognize her if you saw her out on the street, or was it something you physically saw, I guess?
Oh no, I had a full on description of Marianne. She had brown hair. She was, very plain looking. She just, how you would picture a Marianne. I mean, she was just, not saying anything wrong with her, but she was just very simple female that I would play with, but much older than me. She was older than me. She was not my age. I was young and she was older. So she would be like a teenager and I was much younger.
Wow. So, at the time, I'm assuming you thought she was just this older girl who was a friend of yours.
Right.
Looking back, what is your take? Was this your imagination or was there something else going on?
Well, not to be influenced by what I know now, but it's hard not to talk about one without the other. I think that I don't think she was an entity that I saw, but I think she is something that I created to fulfill my need. Because honestly, in my family, I was the only girl. And I had nobody to play with that were any other girls. So I created one so that I could play. I can only take Star Wars so much as I love it, but there was only so much I could take. So I sorry.
I love Star Wars too, so I have a Star Wars tattoo. So we'll have to talk about that later. But anyway, I still have my brother's Star Wars figures, but if I wanted to play, I know, I do. Go get them no, I can't do that right now. Okay, never. We'll do that another. I would love to see those.
Episode. We're gonna have a fourth episode. We'll do a show and tell, and I'll bring down my brother's. I can do that for you.
This is totally gonna happen. Actually, what we need to do now is we need to go visit because I want to see these in person. But we're way off topic now. Yes. So here's the thing: the way you just described that is the way I think we all think about. Like kids make up this playmate. It's completely harmless or whatever. But now there's this idea that some of them might be entities or ghosts or something, right? That kids are seeing.
Those are things that I've heard. So I'm interested on what the two of you think about that. That it could be the spirit of a little
maybe not her imaginary friend, but some kids' imaginary friends.
Right, that they could be something you created, or they could be an actual entity. Is that true?
Can I take that?
Go ahead. So what I think personally is that. To some degree, I think it can be a number of different things. But if you take it as imagination, you can take that a step further and create something called a tulpa or a thought form. Tulpas and thought forms are basically the same thing, although thought form is more Western construct. And tulpa, the word tulpa is from Tibetan Buddhist monks who would meditate and create out of imagination this entity that then could become at least partially sentient. So the whole idea of tulpas has always fascinated me, and I started thinking about it. And first I thought, well, people who claim to have poltergeists, so they say poltergeists are created out of angst for, like, say, a prepubescent girl, can manifest this energy and create a poltergeist. What if we have mislabeled that? What if it's not a poltergeist? What if it's actually a tulpa? A tulpa that was created and has now become sentient. I mean, if you think about something long enough, the idea is that it can take on its own form. In fact, some people say that Slender Man is a thought form or a tulpa. Other people, the gentleman who wrote the Mothman prophecies, he hypothesized that the Mothman might be a tulpa created from all these people who were projecting this image of what they thought they saw, and it became reality.
Wow. That is terrifying, for one. So let me ask you this question. I know you have a question too.
No, but Kara was about to say something too. So
go ahead, Kara. Then I'll ask my question.
No. All I was going to say, to piggyback her, is I think that I'll try to make the distinction between thought form and tulpa by a thought. It has to do with intention. A tulpa, in its original rudimentary sense, was created by the monks to be a companion in their time of meditation and worship when they took their vow of silence and they had no companionship. So they created something to fill a need, almost like an imaginary friend. So the intention behind it is to be something that is a companion and like a partner in that meditative journey, as opposed to a thought form that does not necessarily have to have such a benign construct. It could be whatever you make it in terms of its personality and mood. So, for example, there's an episode, I think it's on Kindred Spirits.
Yes,
it's on Kindred Spirits, and it's the Zombie Boy. It's Zombie Boy, and they did an investigation, and it turned out in that investigation that whatever they thought, they were able to pick up those traits on their investigation, either through chip coffee or phasma or whatever. So whatever thought form they created, it was regurgitated in their investigation, meaning that you do, as a human being, have some sort of control over what you project, and that projection can manifest into something that's bigger and greater.
So is this kind of along the lines of like when you hear about people who are in a challenging relationship or in an unhappy home where they talk about that feeling or that heaviness? Is this kind of in that same ballpark, or is that something completely different?
You want to take it, or me to take it? Well, it all depends on what happens with that heaviness. If that heaviness can turn into something like, there's all this, even out of a bad relationship, even if you look at it in terms of a location, and you're looking at, say, a jail or an asylum or some sort of, place that holds a lot of trauma. When we always say, you're talking to somebody, but you don't know who you're talking to, it's quite possible that those feelings can manifest into something, and that is what we're speaking to, that it doesn't necessarily have a personality until we give it to it.
Right. So you basically, so for a tulpa, well, we'll say tulpa, and it's not something that's just created overnight. It takes a lot for the monks. It took a lot of meditation, a very deep meditative state, and a lot of thinking and projecting. And so the flip side of that, say a thought form would take a lot of, it could be negative energy. It could be fear, like with Slender Man. People started seeing this thing, and more people thought about it, and more people were concerned about it, and all this fears was created. And so the construct of it was just a vessel. And then everyone, through all their posts and talking about it, filled up that vessel with the characteristics. So the thought form itself, or the tulpa itself, is simply a vessel. And then you fill it through either meditation or positive good vibes, or from sadness and anger.
So,
no, go ahead.
So this reminds me of like these. Yeah, this is not This is not the way I thought our imaginary friend conversation was going to go, but this is really interesting. And what's fascinating is we have never talked about this. You know what I mean? It's like I'm new to the world of paranormal spooky stuff, right? Like, I mean, Steve sort of brought me into this whole, and like there's another angle on all this that I've never heard. It's so interesting. But anyway, what I was going to say was it reminds me of like moments of mass hysteria that seem to happen a lot, like in the Japanese culture, where everybody freaks out watching the same cartoon or something. That seems to me to be sort of akin to what you're describing.
Pretty much, you know, it really can be, you know.
So I think that mass hysteria would be, yes, a bunch of people who are imagining, are imagining something or like whether it be a thing or a force or an action, they're imagining it to be true. Whereas a tulpa is one thing that starts out as an imaginary friend, but then takes on a life of its own. So it can exist outside the realm of your imagination. It takes on sentience. Like the Tibetan monks, they would actually rely on their tulpas as an extension of themselves to remind them to meditate or to stay healthy or to eat or to shower, or they relied on their tulpas to help them in everyday life. They took on a sentience.
And I love that because, like you were saying, Kara, earlier, you know, it was your creation that manifested Marion to kind of keep you company and kind of help guide you. So I guess my question for you both would be, well, one of many questions that I have is, if, you know, somebody is watching this and they have a child and that child talks about their imaginary friend all of the time, should there be any concern around that, or are there things to look out for that would cause concern around that?
My first reaction would be no, because generally I think imaginary friends are just that. They're imaginary. Sometimes younger children can't necessarily differentiate between what's real and what's not. But I think the vast majority of imaginary friends are just that. You know, it's imagination, it's play, it's a normal part of developing and growing up as a child. And again, it's not an easy thing to create a thought form or a tulpa. If it were, they would be running around all over the place. It takes a lot of dedication and a lot of energy and time and emotion. And I don't necessarily think that maybe a younger child would have the wherewithal to create that. Maybe a teenager, yes. Not necessarily, in my opinion, a younger child. What do you think about that?
Just in terms of developmental appropriateness, I don't think little kids, and I'm saying this from, I actually teach little kids, and I actually teach a course.
She's a speech therapist.
Yeah, and I teach a course on language development in young children. And so I don't think that little children have the wherewithal to create something, because you have to imbue it with traits. And they don't know who they are yet. So to imbue something with traits so that it would have sentience, it's just out of the realm of possibility at that point. So, you know, in terms of, you know, what to look out for, if you see your child is beyond that realm, like their imaginary friend, you know, is interacting with them in such a way that they're saying things that are beyond their language and linguistic level, or they're saying, you know, they're retelling stories that are beyond what they should be knowing at this point, then I would say, you know, be worried. And that would probably be something that I would call a professional for a paranormal investigation. But I don't think a 3, a 4, a 5, even a 6-year-old would be, you know, able to, you know, create something, you know, with the same traits. That's sophisticated, because you have to really give it a personality. Right. And there are stages of a person who creates a tulpa is called a tulpamancer, and there are stages of development on how you do it. And there are full online communities of people who have created tulpas and how to create tulpas and how to take care of your tulpa, because once they become sentient, then you have to, maintain upkeep, and then comes the ethical question of now what to do, because now that it has sentience, is it a person? There are a lot of ethical questions once you really get into it.
And I think that, imaginary friends, so the flip side of that is children can also, I think they are more open to the paranormal. So, I think there might be certain circumstances in which a child might be communicating with a spirit. I mean, I've heard stories of, the child is talking about they see an older person and they're giving traits and characteristics, and the mom or the dad realizes that that's their, great grandfather or something like that. So, I think that if your child starts coming to you with very specific characteristics, the first thing maybe I would look for are, do a deep dive into your family history, or do a deep dive into the history of your location to see if what they're describing matches anyone who's passed on, because maybe they are communicating with the spirit. And then another side of that is, it's normal for kids to blame stuff. You break the vase, oh, my imaginary friend did it. That's normal. But if they start doing things that are malevolent and blaming it on the imaginary friend, then I would absolutely think that could either be something more nefarious or a pathology that needs to be checked out. One of the two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like your point. A lot of time it reminds me of that old Family Circus cartoon where, they had the not me character when something was broken. You'd see like this
remember that. Little ghost that used to say, not me.
Exactly. And hello, Eddie. Thanks for tuning in and watching. And hey, Christy as well. Remember, if you are watching, you have questions for Non-Lives Paranormal, please drop them in the chat. We will ask them. Not that we don't have a ton of them. And I'm glad you talked about the spirit side, because I have always been told that kids typically are more sensitive to the paranormal and can see things that we necessarily cannot. Why do you think that is? Is it an innocence thing? Is it a timing thing? Any theories on that?
I personally think, it's an innocence thing. They haven't become jaded by self-doubt. It wouldn't be necessarily anything unusual or even scary for them to see a spirit that's, if the spirit's friendly, then they'll accept that on face value and go on with their day. We as adults are sort of programmed to say it's our imagination, but kids don't have that. That's all they have is their imagination, and they live in that gray area. That's what they do. They're all imagination. What do you think?
No, I agree. Kids, in terms of development, are magical thinkers. They just are. So the fact that something that they can see, or reveals themselves to them, it's they're much more open to that possibility and that suggestion that it really is there. I mean, plus in terms of development, kids, when you think about it, and might be a little unorthodox way of looking at it, but the younger they are, the closer they are to the veil from which they came. So if you're going from existence, in one realm to another realm, from existence as spirit to, having human form, the younger they are, the closer they are to that veil, and they can navigate it more easily. It's almost like having one foot in both worlds.
Oh yeah, I agree with that too. I also think that children their life force is very strong, and I think that they are sort of like a beacon, a light for some spirits. Spirits are drawn to children. It's interesting, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking of Poltergeist and Tangina going, it's her life force.
Exactly. That's what I was sitting here thinking of. Exactly. The other point I would make too is that I feel like people have been told, oh, you don't talk about that. Like I think we're at some point we're all told, like, people are going to make fun of me if I talk about this or admit this or tell this thing. In fact, one of the things that we've been proud of here at Phantom History House is a lot of people that have come here realize this is a safe space, and they start to share, well, when I was a little kid, there was this in our house. But they've even told us, I've never told anybody this before, because they know they're going to be mocked or made fun of, or, it's dangerous somehow.
No.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
And we encourage, the same way that you do, we encourage people. You'll find that, or we'll find when we, for being cliche, take our show on the road, when we go out somewhere and we start talking about it, people will be more than happy to, share their experiences with you, but if you come at them, and just ask them directly, have you ever had a paranormal experience? The first answer, boom, no, but then you're like, but then if you start to talk about it a little bit and say, well,
if you give them a safe space, they'll open up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So
well, it's like you said, every time you've done a ghost tour, somebody in the group stays behind and says, wants to tell their ghost story. Everybody seems to have one, or know somebody that has.
Everybody has a story. I really do.
And I did a study on people, and when they realized that it wasn't, and I called it, sometimes it's just not the pipes, right? When they realized it wasn't something they can explain, and when did that acceptance come, that they realized that this was something that was not the pipes, in their house. So I put an open call out to do this survey type study, and you and we just discussed how many people have these questions. Only 17 people responded. Only 70. Nobody wanted to talk about it. But when I would do an event and I would start talking or whatever, and they would tell me their stories, like, hey, would you like to fill out this survey for me? Then I gave them, it's almost like I gave them permission to talk about it.
Exactly. It's all about safe. Yeah, so it's safe space and giving permission, and that non-judgmental way of approaching it. And I think that, going back to the imaginary friend thing, I think that that's an important part of that as well, is, not telling a kid that he or she are crazy because they're imagining this friend.
Right.
It's encouraging them either from the imagination side or from, say, it is an entity. Hopefully it's a friendly one, Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the history of, if your kid is starting to describe some specific characteristics of, hey, this sounds like it's great grandma or whatever it might be. Have you ever encountered a situation where like a kid or a young person has like seen a photograph? Because I've heard these stories too, where they see a photo and they're like, oh, this is my friend Mabel. Have you ever encountered anything like that? Because that's very Hollywood.
It is very Hollywood. It is very Hollywood. And speaking of very Hollywood, I can tell you that we did an episode for a TV series called My Haunted Hometown. And our episode is called Tortured Spirits, because, and I think I mentioned this at the last one, I only live about maybe 1.5 miles, maybe 1.3 miles away from the old abandoned Overbrook Asylum. And I grew up here and whatever, and now the place is defunct and it is haunted, and everybody has gone to investigate it and all that other kind of stuff. I'm sorry. And then my children, when we moved back to this town, my children, one of the ones that you met before, they went to preschool on the grounds of the old asylum.
Wow.
And so the essence of the show was that people who experience hauntings due to the history of the land and the town and the things that are in the town. Now, my son was not the one that you met, my other son. Actually, when we would drive to preschool, he would look out the window and he would laugh. And he would play and he would do things like that. And this is when we're talking about when it starts to take more of a malevolent turn. He wasn't as verbal as my other son, so he really didn't talk about it. He would just laugh and point. And then again, he was only 2, so he would laugh and he would point and he would play and by himself. But it was like he had other people. Oh, I'm sorry, other people in the room. and I lost my point now because he told me I was kicking the table, and now I lost my point. So he never described anybody as much as he did acknowledge that there was a presence. And when there was more of a malevolent kind of thing, it would be more that, like it would be like he would be afraid, or he would have anxiety, or, but now I'm talking about someone who was really young and couldn't communicate their feelings that much. So he would have anxiety. And then when he got older and he started to communicate, again, this is what we're talking about, language that's much more developed than what your child is. He said to me, "Mommy, do you lucid dream?" Now, a 7-year-old should not know what a lucid dream is. And he said to me, "Mommy, do you lucid dream?" And I said, "What?" And he and and he said, and then I realized he had a very hard time telling the difference between what was real and what was not real. And that's when I started to realize that he was possibly sensitive, because he was confusing what he saw with what he really saw. So he almost like having a foot in both worlds. He had two distinct realities. He had the one that only he saw and knew by us telling him. Nobody else could see what he was talking about, and then there was the reality of everybody else. Now that he's 19 years old, and he came every once in a while. Now he says it's cringe, but we took him on a couple of ghost hunts and with us, and he was the only one that he saw the apparitions, and he was able to describe them to the docent. He said
the Burlington County Prison Museum.
Yeah, he was like what, 16?
Yeah, 16? About 16.
He was about 16, and he said, "Who's that guy in the other room?" And so the docent went running down there because she thought somebody got into one of the areas of the prison museum that you weren't supposed to be, that was closed off. And she said to him, "Well, what did he look like?" And he described it, and he described the prison guard who was murdered by the prisoners because he was, a little bit heavy-handed in the way he treated everybody, and he treated them cruelly, and they beat him over the head in that room with a pipe.
Wow.
So, and he was the only one who saw. That was a long answer to your question.
No, but you answered my question, which I love, because it does happen. And, you find that moment of truth where it's, oh, this is not just an imagination thing. There's something more going on here. And Sally just commented a couple of things. She says, lots of adults don't know what lucid dreams mean. So that's valid. And she also said that her brother just admitted an experience from their childhood home after Shio told him about something she had experienced.
So once you share your story, somebody's more likely to be. That just makes perfect sense, though. They've realized that it's a safe space. They're going to believe you.
Yeah, you're in the same club.
Okay. They're not going to make fun of you. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So do you have any idea, like what percentage of imaginary friends might be spirits or
tulpas?
No, that's different. Like the tulpa is something someone's intentionally created, if I understand it. But I'm talking about like a spirit.
100% of tulpas are tulpas. 100% of tulpas are tulpas because they're created with intention. So they have to be created.
But I mean, the sort of premise I thought we were going to be talking about tonight is that there's a sense that a number of children's childhood imaginary friends are actual ghosts or spirits or grandma watching over them, whatever. Do we have any idea of like how much that is, how common that is, or anything about that?
I would say probably 90% are just imagination, and the remaining 10%, who knows?
That's a good statistic. I'm going to look that up.
That's kind of what I'm just based on what I see in the paranormal community and paranormal kids.
65%.
Oh, there she's Googled it now.
I can Google it. 65% of all children have an imaginary friend by the age of 7.
But what percentage of those are actually spirits? That's what we're talking about.
Well, I don't think half those people had an paranormal investigation. So
65%. Good.
I think that's a very helpful statistic to throw on the table, though, because
Absolutely.
a lot of kids, it's very common. Everybody thinks it's very common for kids. And I love that kids have imagination. I had a great imagination as a kid, and I remember playing all kinds of games and stuff, but I don't remember having a specific imaginary friend, but that's fine. But I think the concern is that, we're like, the conversations we keep having is, is Bigfoot really an alien? And is, there's all of these dimensional conversations about all these phenomenon that people talk about. Right. I just wondered how common it is for imaginary friends to be part of a paranormal phenomenon.
I'm guessing 10%. Yeah. And I'm basing that on, like when we go on, say, an investigation of maybe someone who thinks their house is haunted, we can usually find naturally occurring things that are going on in the home that aren't paranormal. And I would say that happens, 90% of the time. But then there's that 10% that is unexplainable. And anything that's not normal is by definition paranormal. So I'll parlay that into kids who have imaginary friends. I'd say, 90% of the time, it's very benign. It's just their imagination. But then there's that 10% that falls into that category of, we're not really sure, but it could very well be that they are making contact with the spirit world. Especially if you have a child who is sensitive, who maybe is showing signs of being maybe an empath. Maybe if you have a kid who's very empathic, I think they have a better chance of seeing a spirit. Yeah.
I think that makes sense. And I think that's also, I don't know if it's genetics or generational or whatever it is, but of course you hear about, I'm a psychic and my mother was a psychic and my mother's mother was a psychic. So there seems to be that generational connection too. It makes me wonder if all three of those generations had imaginary friend experiences. That's something I'm going to start asking people because I'm curious.
So then you can even go further down the rabbit hole. And if you have a child who is psychic and whose grandmother was psychic and his mother was psychic, so then you have spirit guides. So if I'm not psychic, but many of my psychic friends talk about their spirit guides. So, hypothetically, if they are psychic, they would probably at a young age be introduced to their spirit guide. Sure.
That's really smart. That makes perfect. I like that a lot because we've heard that term used a lot by our psychic medium friends that we've encountered, and they talk about their spirit guides, and I can imagine that being something that they would possibly encounter, as younger. Mm-hmm. I like that theory a lot. Interesting.
So as we wrap up this conversation, it sounds like that imaginary friends, mostly are imaginary, but could be 10% something else, and usually not something to be afraid of. That's kind of what I've learned. Yeah. We have somebody who said, Christy, who is a psychic, spirit guide, interesting. I'm a psychic. My mom was, and my grandmother. So we have one in the audience who has that same.
So at what age did you find your spirit guide? If you have one, I would assume you probably met them, or maybe you didn't even realize it. Maybe you thought they were an imaginary friend, but they were actually your spirit guide coming to you at a young age. Yeah, I just put that together.
I think that happens to people. They realize later what's something, the additional thing in their life is.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I'm just putting it. I'm just putting it together now because when we do events or whatever, Gail is more the techie, and I'm more the psychic, the intuitive, the empath. And I was telling her one day when we were doing something, and I said, I don't know why, I just know. It just comes to me, and I have to say it. And so she said, well, maybe you're looking at it wrong. Maybe it's your spirit guide. So now maybe I'm thinking it's Marianne. I'm taking my own. I'm taking my own advice. That's it. Full circle. Thank you for the therapy session.
That's fantastic how that came full circle. I'm loving it.
I want to share
There
some
you
messages
go.
from our friends. Waltzes with Ghosts, they're watching. They said, 9 Lives Paranormal, love following your site, and enjoyed following us as well. So thank you. We always appreciate all the comments and the warm comments and welcomes that you share with us. And a lot of people are watching. I don't see any other specific questions, but a lot of people are talking about how they have had an imaginary friend or a lot of stuffed animals. And
well, I mentioned my Winnie the Pooh, and so that people were like, I had a lot of stuffed animals. Yeah, I have a stuffed animal thing. But
yeah, I had this is kind of an imaginary friend because I had a stuffed Figment doll from Epcot, and he is imagination. Right?
It's a spirit of imagination, yeah.
So spirit of imagination.
In the name, Figment. It's
that is. All right, well, time to wrap this up.
It is. What
would you guys like to? You want me to take this? You want to?
Yeah.
So, what would you want to leave our audience with? We've talked about a lot of stuff that was really interesting. We went to places I didn't expect to go, and I've really enjoyed that.
I know.
One last thing, each of you. One last thing to anybody that's watching. What would you like to say about all of this?
You go first.
I would say that if you have a child who has an imaginary friend, don't automatically think that they're talking to a ghost in their room. But talk to them. Ask them what the imaginary friend looks like, what the imaginary friend tells them, what they talk about. Ask them to draw the imaginary friend. And then you have the pieces to move forward if you have a suspicion that, because I think parents know, maybe parents can sense if there's maybe the presence of a loved one that's passed. But again, we're adults, so we're trained to go, it's my imagination. My mom's not really here. But what if she is? And what if your child is seeing your mom? So ask the questions and do the investigation, or call somebody like us and we can do the investigation. But again, it's almost never anything nefarious. Even when we go on these investigations, I tell people no preconceived notions. Just because if you go into a house and a spirit pulls your hair, doesn't mean that the spirit was trying to attack you. It means you're talking to these spirits and they didn't know how else to get your attention. So they pulled your hair. No preconceived notions. Most spirits are not malevolent. They only want to be acknowledged.
Yep. And the only thing I could say is that the veil is thinner than you think, and your thoughts are stronger than you think. And that's really about it.
Wow, that's really good.
And I can safely say I've never had my hair pulled during an investigation. Maybe the beard over. So before we say goodbye, let everybody who's watching know where they can find you, websites, social media, all that good stuff. Where can everybody learn more about you?
Well, you can find us at 9livesparanormal.com or on Facebook or on Instagram at 9livesparanormal.com. Same on TikTok at 9livesparanormal.com. Follow us and you'll see where we'll be having our events, what we're doing. We post a lot of footage from, we do a lot of lives. We collaborate with a lot of people. So if you are a paranormal team and you want to collab on something, we are always looking to do experiments, even from long distances, and doing double live streams. So just reach out and we'll talk.
And don't miss them on the latest podcast episode.
Absolutely, where we talk about the Shanley Hotel. And in our full interview from that, you learn why they call themselves 9 Lives Paranormal. So make sure you listen to that interview.
Which is on YouTube.
And it's on our website. So check that out and you can learn where that name come from. If you look at the name, it kind of gives you a hint, but that was one of the questions I had.
I love that.
Gail, Kara, thank you both so much for taking time to chat with us on this Wednesday night. It was great seeing you both again.
Good to see you too.
I hope we can do this again. I would love to stay in touch and keep collaborating.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like in the first 3 minutes, there was all this stuff that was talked about, and I'm like, I want to follow up, so we will have to do this again.
We're going to take notes.
Absolutely. Love it.
You guys are wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for tuning in and watching, and we will see you next time on Phantom History House Calls.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Good night.